Alright, welcome back. So in this video, we're now going to go over the main charging phase for psychic energy. So like I said before in the last video, the pre-charging phase actually functions more like the main charging phase. And that's going to make more sense based on what we talk about in this video. So to go over this first point, basically says the high entropy rate for psychic energy generally means spending a shorter amount of time in the main charging phase, right? And so the reason I say that is because, like we said before, so psychic energy is highly dampened by the body, right? Much more so than all your other transcendental mental abilities. Now, when you build it up initially by pre-charging, right? So as much as the body works to dampen psychic energy, prevent it from building, it still doesn't fully block the process of pre-charging, right? So when you pre-charge, you're building energy or charging energy in the entropy dead zone, basically, right? So basically, the process of building negative memory through the entropy rate still works even when it comes to psychic energy, and your body really, when you pre-charge, you still have some ability to build energy in that entropy dead zone. And that causes your subconscious to become more volatile relative to the target or the subject you focus on that you're trying to sense, right? Now, when you main charge, you're going beyond that 10-second marks, right? So when you pre-charge, you focus on the target, hold its sense intention, and you'll feel the buildup of psychic energy building until a peak level, and then right after, between 7 and 10 seconds, so after that mark, you'll feel it going down a little bit. So now you're in the main charging phase. And as it goes down, you're going to feel like you're not feeling the psychic energy as much, right? And that's because now negative memory is at full power again. And before we go into that process more, basically once you leave that pre-charging phase, the entropy rate goes to full power, and it's, like I said, it's much higher than all the other transcendental mental abilities. So you can pre-charge a little bit still, because you can main charge a little bit still because you pre-charge, right? So you built up so much, we could say psychic energy, but in this context, I want to say volatility, right? So your subconscious has become so volatile, right, relative to that target in building psychic energy, that it can withstand some of that negative memory, right? So, however, it can't withstand it that much, right? So we actually talked about that. So these are topics we talked about in book 1. Right, so when, let's say you're listening to a song that's new, right, you're still building negative memory, even when it feels like it's super new, when you're building a whole bunch of positive memory while focusing on it. So you feel a lot of emotion while listening to the new song. In a moment, it doesn't feel like it's getting old to you, but it is, right? Negative memory is still building, and eventually, as it builds more and more, that song is going to start to feel more and more old, right? And you're not going to feel as much emotion from it. But initially, when it's new, you've got some leeway, right? You've got some leeway in terms of how much you can listen to it without feeling like it's old. So the same thing that happens for any subconscious charge, right? But in this case, it happens when you pre-charge. When you pre-charge, your subconscious is highly volatile, right? So now, when you focus on the target and you try to sense it, which again, we'll talk more about in terms of the main charging technique in a moment, but as you focus on it and you try to sense it, your subconscious is actually charging and is doing stuff, right? So, but negative memory is still building. And with psychic energy, it's going to build extremely fast. Right? So because it builds so fast, it's going to eventually, if you do it for too long a time, it's going to be the case that you notice you're not really feeling as much energy, right? You're not feeling it as much anymore, and your subconscious isn't responding as much to the sense intention and to the target that you pre-charged, right? And the reason for that is because negative memory has now built up so much that it's suppressing your subconscious ability to enter its excited state, which also means suppressing your conscious mind's ability to enter a transcendental state and build positive memory, right? So, in other words, I say all that to say that because psychic energy, the entropy rate for psychic energy is so high, you really won't be able to go past that pre-charging phase even that far, even if you are using the main charging technique, right? And so, like I said, people who don't understand how to use the pre-charging technique, technically they're going straight into the main charging technique. They don't really do it according to the main charging technique either. But still, people who don't know what they're doing, in theory, they're just skipping to the main charging technique. Now, the entropy rate's too high to just skip to the main charging technique. You can do that with the other transcendental mental abilities. But it'd be really hard to do with psychic energy, especially if you do it in one long continuous interval. So, so it's better to pre-charge. Now, when you pre-charge, you build up some volatility, so it can now withstand that high entropy rate a little bit, but it can't withstand it that much, right? So when you main charge, you would only main charge for a very short time, right? So when I used to do it, now again, I haven't really used psychic energy that much, right? So I don't have a lot of experience with it, but this is the theory I've developed from the times that I have done it. But when you main charge, after pre-charging, I would probably say roughly 30. I think I've only went for, I forget what I put in the book. I think I put 30 to 40 seconds in the book. But I think I went probably around that time. But right in the beginning of it, maybe 20. I don't count it, but maybe 20 seconds, right? I have to really pre-charge and main charge to really get to go further, like maybe 30, 40 seconds. I don't think I've ever done like a minute or whatever in terms of my main charge, which again, I'll talk a little more about that in a moment. But the point is that your main charging sessions are going to be very, very, very short, right? Because you do not want to go too long into the main charging phase because you'll just build up too much negative memory, right? Because the subconscious entry rate is so high. Subconscious entropy rate is so high, right? So that's why I say, and even then, when you let's say you main charge for a certain amount of time and you feel like a good chunk of negative memory is building, then you can just go back to pre-charging, right? So you would kind of skip back and forth between pre-charging and main charging and back and forth if you feel like you've main charged too long, right? Because negative memory is building up much, much faster during the main charging phase, no matter what you do, because you went past that 10-second mark. So basically, that is how you would, that's basically the best way to look at it. Again, we haven't went into the process too much yet, but it's good to just get an idea of the negative memory aspect of charging psychic energy, because you won't be able to charge it unless you get around that that aspect of it, right? So now to go on to this point, basically, just to recap, I would just want to make sure it's clear, right? From here, I just say all of this to say that you won't main charge too long, and you're going to really spend most of your time only charging for a very short period of time, or very short intervals when it comes to psychic energy. Now to go over this point, as you continue to pre-charge and main charge psychic energy, and that eventually leads to deep charging, so that's important, right? So like I said, before I read the rest of it, when you can pre-charge, I would recommend, I think when I did it, probably did it like a day or two. I wasn't doing this in earnest, so I wasn't doing it like according to by the book, the best way to do it, but I did it for roughly a day in terms of pre-charging, and then I'd main charge for like maybe 20 seconds or so. But as you keep doing this back and forth, right, day after day after day, you're going to start deep charging, right? So, like I said before in book 1, you can actually deep charge a pre-charge, right? So you keep pre-charging in multiple sessions over the course of 7 days, and that'll actually start your pre-charge. But with psychic energy, you can skip back and forth between pre-charging and main charging. But again, your main charging sessions would be very short as well. But as you keep doing that, eventually you start to deep charge the psychic energy. Like I said, I think I've only deep charged about 2 times in my life with psychic energy. Never really went that far with it. But as you deep charge more and more, you will feel a great deal of potential energy in your subconscious. So the reason I word it that way is because that's basically the best way I could describe it in terms of how it feels. Excuse me. So when you're constantly charging your subconscious in these very short intervals, right, your subconscious is going to feel like, it's going to feel like your subconscious is, I don't want to word it. You're going to feel like you have a mood, right? So that's what happens when you deep charge. It affects your mood. And what your mood is going to feel like in this case is it's going to feel like you want to do something. Well, you want to use your psychic abilities. Basically, you're going to have this ambient sort of urge to focus on the target and sense it, right? Which you would expect from decharging psychic energy. But the reason it feels like potential energy is because it's like not allowed to flow in the sense, right? Because it doesn't flow because you keep doing it in very short intervals, right? So you feel this urge to do it for a longer interval and just do it more freely. So when you normally deep charge, you normally do it according to the main charging session and for longer intervals, right? So in that case, you feel this freedom, this ability to flow. Let's say you deep charge creativity, right, or transcendental creativity. Your mood would just put you in the mood to start creating. Your mood would just cause you to feel an urge to start creating freely. You wouldn't create for like a few seconds and then stop, right, and then create a few seconds and stop. That's how psychic energy is. And when you keep doing it in those short intervals, you feel like this urge to do it more freely. And it has a very potential energy-like feeling, right? Like a buildup of something you just want to release. That's what it feels like. And so I just thought that was interesting. But yeah, you're going to feel that with your psychic energy, and you're going to want to give into that urge and just focus on your target and start sensing it, because that's going to feel like a form of release. But if you give into that urge for too long, you're going to notice that that urge starts to go down, and then you start to not feel much at all because negative memory is building up because you went too long. And the entropy rate is really high for psychic energy. So yeah, you got to kind of resist the urge, that potential energy feeling, to just release and do it like crazy, right? You have to keep it almost wound up, right? The psychic energy, and just keep doing it in short intervals. So now we're going to talk about the type of stories you use, because the main charging technique is basically the same, right, as we've been talking about. You hold the intention for 7 to 10 seconds, so you enter a transcendental state, and you do it while you're also telling a story of some kind, right? We talked about how different stories favor different frequencies. Now, in this case, you would do the same thing. So you'd hold a sense intention for 7 to 10 seconds. So in the case of clairvoyance, that would be the intention to see the target. Again, that's not guess, that's not creatively visualize or whatever. It's the intention to actually see the target. You'd hold that intention for 7 to 10 seconds. Now, the type of story you would tell while holding that intention, in my experience, the best type of story is what I call it, well, I don't call it that, but you could call it an affirmational story. So affirmational stories help to build psychic energy, right? So basically, an affirmational story would be a story that revolves around the idea or a transcendental belief, right? So basically, it's like you're kind of telling a story to charge a transcendental belief in this case. And the belief would be that you can see the target, right? So let's say there's some target that's hidden from me, right? And I want to charge psychic energy or use clairvoyance or ESP to see it, right? I would hold the intention to see the target for 7 to 10 seconds. And then I would just create some story in my mind. That the story would say things. I would express assertions with my intention that say things like, I can see the target, or I'm looking at the target right now, or I'm seeing the target. I believe I can see the target. I would just keep telling some story, some interesting story that expresses that belief, right? And I want the belief to be very pure, right? I don't want any doubt in terms of my belief, because doubt would cause my subconscious to charge in a different way, which is not going to be psychic energy, right? I want to express the belief that I'm looking at the target, that I can see the target, and I would keep affirming it to myself, right? That I'm looking at the target right now, I see it, I know what it looks like, I understand it, and I would keep using these affirmational statements in my story and keep telling a new story in a way that makes me feel affirmed in that belief. So it's a transcendental belief charge. Now, the important thing that's interesting here is that I usually close my eyes when I'm doing this. I haven't really done it that much, but when I have done it, I close my eyes, right? Because I don't want the sensory information from my physical senses to get in the way of the sensory information I'm trying to get from my psychic abilities, right? So it's a little easier. You don't have to close your eyes, but I find it to be a little easier when I close my eyes. And when I close my eyes, now obviously I don't see anything, I just see the blackness of my eyelids, but even though I'm not seeing anything in a moment, I still want to charge the belief that I'm looking at the target, even though I'm not, right? And this can feel very contradictory, right? We don't generally see something and then tell ourselves we're seeing something and we're not seeing, right? And so there's going to be a natural urge to say, in your heart, to say like, oh, I'm not, when I assert the command that I'm seeing something, because there'll be a natural urge to say, no, you're not, right? You don't see anything, right? That urge is actually going to block your ability to use charged psychic energy, right? It's going to dampen it, I should say, right? Ignore the fact that you're not actually seeing it and still hold the belief that you're seeing it anyway, right? And it can be hard to do that because you almost feel like you're telling yourself a lie, because part of you is going to say, no, I'm not looking at it, right? But you have to ignore that and just charge the belief that you are, right? So this is kind of a faith-based sort of effort here, at least in this part. And you want to just hold the intention that says, you're looking at it, I can see it. And you want, even if you're not, you still hold the belief you're seeing it. And you want to try to get that belief as pure as possible, right? And as you keep telling a story, in a way that makes that belief, that charges that transcendental belief that you're seeing the target in the present moment right now, right? And you know what it looks like and you're seeing it now. Your subconscious is going to charge in a way where it builds psychic energy, and it's going to, your subconscious instinct is going to use your ESP. So we talked about how subconscious instinct has a very just do it feeling, right? It's not premeditated, it's not calculated, you just do it in the moment. So when you produce an emotion, you just do it. You don't think about it, you just do it naturally. That's how your subconscious expresses thoughts. So it's going to do that same thing. When you do this, it's going to do that same thing for your ESP or psychic abilities. When you charge your subconscious in that way and you tell this affirmational story and you keep going on in and out of a transcendental state doing this with the target, then your subconscious will just sense it, right? It's going to, your subconscious instinct is going to express itself in the form of sensing, right? And it's just going to influence your spirit in a way that affects your third eye, where you're just going to sense the target, just like that. Same way you do it, you would just do it with an emotion. So that'll make more sense once you experience that. Again, you don't do any of this unless you have God's permission. But yeah, so that's how you build. That's pretty much the process for building psychic energy using the main charging technique. Again, we'll talk a little more about the aspect of receiving images and things like that and using that to predict the target, because there's more to explain with that portion of it. Right now, we're just talking about the charging portion. But to go over this next point, energy builds more effectively when telling your story in a state of full attention. So that's true for any type of charge, but it's important to recognize here too. So when you're in the state of full attention, your psychic energy charges better and things charge more purely. So we talked about how to enter a state, the different methods for entering a state of full attention in book 1. So one of them is just to be very, very patient. So you just focus on the target, tell your story, hold the intention, the sense intention, and just be very patient. Kind of ignore other thoughts that try to distract your mind's attention, and just keep your attention on the story and telling on the affirmational aspect of the story, the transcendental belief, and or keep your attention on the story in such a way that your story is charging a transcendental belief, and also on the sense intention on the target. Right, and as you just be very patient and ignore these thoughts and urges to focus on other things, you're going to enter a state of full attention with it, right? We talked about desire. In this case, I would just say you could also tell your story in a way that is just very, very interesting, right? So that's another way you could do it. Try to make the story interesting and make it yourself feel more invested in your story so that's more believable. You don't want to do it in a very, just going through the emotions kind of way, because it's not going to charge properly. You want to feel very interested. Very interested, very motivated, and very focused on the story on a transcendental level, right? So you have to tell your story in a way that actually captures your own sense of interest in doing this. And we'll talk about the third technique in a moment, because that's actually important to this technique too. But when you enter a state of full attention, the psychic energy charges better. And to go over this next point, so it says calm burst charging is preferred. Excitement burst charging can induce a more intense psychic headache. So this is my experience. I haven't really practiced charging psychic, because this came much later in terms of my theory, and I haven't practiced psychic energy yet leaning more into a calm burst or excitement burst charge. But based on my memory, what I did some time ago, I would say that calm burst charging is preferred, which means you relax more. You relax into the charge more when you do this. Because remember, subconscious energy can charge in a more excitement-based way and a calm-based way. So the more you lean into one, the more your subconscious will charge. When you keep going back and forth between the two, it doesn't charge as much because they cancel each other out for the most part. But if you lean into that, every time you enter a transcendental state, if you lean into a calm feeling or slowing down or relaxing feeling, then the psychic energy will charge in a calm burst way. I have done an excitement burst charge occasionally. Now, this was years ago. I didn't have the terminology of excitement burst. I didn't really understand that at the time, but I remember doing it sometimes. And I think I mentioned it before. I used to call it a push. And when I would do it, so with excitement burst charge in this case, when you enter a transcendental state, you would do like a burst of effort through subconscious instinct, not your negative mind, right? Through your positive mind, you would do a burst of effort to sense the target, right? In just a real burst of effort with your subconscious instinct. You could do that, but when I used to do it, I would feel that what came to my mind was more accurate, but man, did it give me a headache. It gave me what we talked about, which was a psychic headache. So I'd feel it right in my pineal gland. It used to hurt so much, right? I used to hate that feeling. But when I would do it, I would feel like the images I got were more accurate. So actually, I didn't talk about that, which we're going to talk more about in the next video. But when you're telling a story in your mind, you enter a transcendental state, then the images that come to your mind, so we're talking about clairvoyance, right? So the images that come to your mind are going to be based on the target or represent the target, right? So again, we'll talk a little more about that in the next video. But when I would do an excitement burst with it, I would feel like the images that came to mind were better representations of the target or more accurate representations of the target. But it used to always be a cost to that because it would hurt so much, right? So just wanted to mention that here, and that could be dangerous for some people, right? So I didn't get any permanent brain damage, but if you're getting, everyone's different, right? You could really hurt yourself doing this if you get psychic headaches like I did. So you have to be careful. So the last point here is that you can also enter a state of full attention using the sleep-awake method. So this one is a little bit tricky for psychic energy. Maybe not too much, but I'll explain it. So what I used to do, and I don't really feel like going into the story, right? But what I'll just say is that, so when you pre-charge and you main charge the psychic energy, you can enter a state of full attention by making your story more interesting and by just being patient and waiting for yourself to enter a state of full attention. But an even better way, you can go even deeper into that state, or I should say it's easier to go in that state than here, using these techniques. And the reason it's a little different with psychic energy is because of the entropy rate, right? And because of the nature of what psychic energy is. It's actually hard. I should actually change this. It's a little hard to go in a state of full attention with these techniques because of the way psychic energy works. It actually works a little bit more freely, better when you're using this technique. So basically what I'm getting at here is the dream awake method. So we talked about the dream awake method in chapter 12. Basically, you would charge a certain amount of energy, right? So in this case, it would be psychic energy, using the main pre-charging and main charging techniques. And then what you would do is just kind of relax your mind as if you're falling asleep, right? It doesn't have to be that you're actually falling asleep. You could be, I don't recommend to be standing up or do something where you get hurt doing it, but you could sit down and relax or even lie down. You gotta be careful not to fall all the way asleep if you're lying down, but you could sit down or get in a relaxed position. And then just kind of close your eyes and let your mind drift off as if you're going to sleep, right? Now it's going to feel risky when you're doing that because you're like, well, if I let my mind drift off all the way, then I actually will just fall asleep or I'll just go into a daydream, which is going to have nothing to do with this. And that's correct. But here's the idea. The existing charge you have is still going to impact or compel your subconscious mind to use its psychic abilities, or it's going to cause your subconscious instinct to express itself in the form of sensing the target, right? Now, doing that in terms of actually drifting off to sleep, you're not in full control. So now we're talking in terms of probability or odds, right? What are the odds that your mind is just going to randomly do that in a dreamlike state? Because again, you're not controlling it anymore, right? You're not in the state that you are when you're doing these. You actually are just letting your mind drift off to sleep, even if it's just for a few seconds. So your mind could dream anything in those few seconds. But if you already have an existing charge, then there's a much more increased chance that your subconscious instinct is going to choose to just sense the target in that state. Now, when it successfully does choose to sense the target in that state, I find it to be way more accurate and way more precise. And that's because your conscious mind isn't sort of producing all these intentions to get in the way. So it's much more, your subconscious instinct does it in a much more free way. And that's important for psychic energy because your conscious mind's intentions are going to we'll talk more about it in the next video, but your conscious mind's intentions are kind of get in the way, right? Even if you hold the intention to sense the target, not all of your intention is going to be just sensing a target. Some of it is, we talked about it before, which is related to a state of full attention, but some of your thoughts are going to be wasted on ideas related to guessing, ideas related to creating, and things like that. So some of it's wasted. But I find it to be much more accurate when you do it in a dreamlike state. It's just like those other thoughts just don't get in the way, right? Soon, like at some point, your subconscious instinct, because of your existing charge, your pre-existing charge, from pre-charging and main charging, it causes your subconscious instinct to much more purely, without guessing, without inserting its own bias and things like that, it just senses the target very directly, and you get a very accurate impression. I didn't talk about impressions yet, I'll talk about them in the next video. But yeah, so the sleep-awake method is actually ideal for psychic energy, and you get really good impressions doing that, impressions of the target. But yeah, so that's pretty much it. That's the pre-charging and main charging. That's the pre-charging and main charging. Pre-charging and main charging process for building psychic energy. In the next video, we're going to talk about. We're just going to talk more about the process of extracting information about the target from these processes, where you're telling a story in your mind and you're entering a transcendental state, and your subconscious instinct is continuing with telling a story. Right, so we're going to talk more about how to actually get information about the target from this process. But this is really just building the energy. So this is the main technique for it. Right, so yeah, that's it for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next video.